There's so many opportunities, but if you want to become an AI PM, get your hands dirty. If I want to move into big tech, I may need to accept a lower role. If you're just a junkie for having a big impact, oftentimes you'll get more of that big impact at a smaller place. At least what I recommend to people is to not try to plan out the roadmap for a year, but instead try to plan out the strategy for the year. When it comes to roadmaps, I prefer to only think about the quarter. Think about them less as like people and more as they're a function of the business. A lot of the conflicts that you see are almost by design. The business has given that person a narrow OKR. It has nothing to do with how nice or how not nice they are, really. It just has to do with how the business was designed for conflicting incentives. Let's first explain AI PM. So there are three types of AI PMs. There are AI PMs who work on AI products, like the PMs at OpenAI. The second group of AI PMs is PMs who build AI features into normal products. AI comments on LinkedIn. And then the third group of AI PMs is your AI-powered PM. They're using AI tools to succeed in their job. And here's the bad news, guys. There aren't that many of those roles. What I found is that 88% of roles are still core product
Hello
management.
everyone, this is Maria, and today I'm very excited and happy to see Aakash Gupta with me, who is an influencer, a host, a product leader, and now we are changing the roles because we just recorded podcast where I was the guest, and now I'm very excited to have you as guest and ask all the questions that I have. Welcome.
Happy to be here. Really enjoyed recording our episode.
Yeah, me too. I had so much fun, and I left with this feeling of now I have all those questions that I want to ask, and it's not my turn. So today it is my turn, and for you who never heard about Aakash, because of course we are in the Agile state of mind, we usually talk to people that are from the Agile side, like Agile coaches, Scrum Masters. I did have Pavel Hurin on my podcast and other PMs. So I want to just quickly tell you that Aakash he used to be a head and VP of product, and now he is hosting the product growth blog and podcast. It's in the Substack. You can check news.aakashg. And I really recommend you to do it because you will see how many followers one can get talking about product management. And the great thing is that I just wanted to prepare for this podcast and I started reading your articles and I couldn't stop. They are so interesting, and one would think you do a lot of deep dives, but you like get me in there, it's like I feel like I'm getting into a spiral that I cannot stop. It's like binge watching series, it's like binge reading articles. So I really recommend everyone to go and check. I will put the link down in the section, in the comments and in the description. But well, let me also have you present yourself. I would love to hear your perspective, so you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we will start.
Sure. From PPM to VP of product was kind of a 15-year journey for me. And it was 15 years of wanting to become a VP of product at a unicorn startup. And then after becoming it, a year later leaving to become a content creator. Just doing two jobs was a lot. So I already had this content business in place. And then I was also a VP of product, and I have two kids. And so now I feel like I'm just living my best life, just doing one job, having some work-life balance, getting to come on podcasts and talk to awesome people like you every day. So loving life.
That's great, and great to hear that. And we will come back to that story where you, or maybe we can start with that. Like, what happened? When did you know? Now I think I will just switch, because we are a lot of people like that we have a day job and we also share our precious information and the understanding of the world with the world. But when is the moment, when was it for you like, oh, I think I will be able to just do the one job?
Yeah, it started accidentally. Actually, I accidentally fell into writing about product management. You mentioned how many followers you can get writing about product management. I didn't want to be that person. When I started writing, I was sharing my work, my learnings that I was having as a product manager in gaming. And in gaming, where I live, there aren't many other gaming companies that are very successful. I was working on Fortnite. That was about it. And so writing was a method for me to connect with like-minded people, and it worked really well for that. But one day I was on vacation in Europe, as one tends to do, and I was sipping some coffee and I read a LinkedIn post, and it infuriated me. It was such a bad take on product management. So I just, as you know, some of the best content is, I just got on my phone inspired and wrote up a bit of a rant and clicked post. And what do you know? Way more engagement, way more reach than all of my other content that was often heavily researched, heavily edited. Here comes this hot take on product management. And so over time, I started to write more and more about product management. And the interesting thing about product management and also growth, the other topic I write about, is that there's a lot of established business models. So Lenny, he has a paid newsletter. Lenny also has a podcast, and many other people have started to create newsletters and podcasts along the way. And so I was inspired kind of incrementally, step by step, actually by Powell Hearn, like you mentioned, in February of 2023 to turn on monetization for the newsletter. And at the time, I was also working as a VP of product, and I started to see the newsletter growing so fast. I think I basically followed a trend that's happening broadly within the economy, which is the fastest growing job in America actually right now is becoming an influencer, a content creator. And so like many other people, I started to see, okay, I have this monetized newsletter and it's growing pretty fast. And if it continues to grow, I'm going to be earning more from this newsletter than I do as a VP of product. And that continued to be the case. And so it wasn't per se a moment, but it was this continued growth of the newsletter in this niche that had kind of found me. And as I saw that continued growth, I started to think about my core values. My values, control over my time, control over what I work on and what I do, work-life balance to spend time with my kids, but also earning a lot. I do care about that too. And so this job, when I compared it across those kind of four big values compared to VP of product or doing both, those are essentially the three options. Just doing content really scored the best. Nowadays I have 2 meetings a day. I have a few emails, but otherwise I'm just doing work that I decide what I want to work on. And if I don't want to work today, everything will be fine. So I really like this, and because of all those reasons, I had to make the switch.
I love it, and I love how, when you smile talking about it, because it really shows that this is the way you chose and you succeeded. And I also, when I was thinking about you and Pavel and maybe David Pereira or Martin Dahlmine, because I guess you all know each other.
Yes.
Right? So I was thinking that it is you can see so well that what you learn as a product person, that you need to get the product out there and monetize it and make it appealing to the users, really. And you enact that in those newsletters and podcasts that you do. And especially you, I think when you talked about the values, who would talk about values, And you do, because you really believe that. And I think that that's really great to see. And also I think it's a great success story to share so that people don't give up on their dreams, right? But go on and do that. And I started we started when we talked about our podcast the other way around. We started talking about the differences between the US and Europe. You are in the US, I'm in Europe. And I really, when I read your newsletter, I see so many, wow, everything is so ordered, so defined in the US. You have this kind of company. This enterprise scale company has this many employees and teams, and the smaller companies have this many employees. And then you have those different types of a PM, a product manager. You have a growth, a core PM, a platform PM, and an AI PM. And it's like, wow, everything is defined already. And I think there is this difference that in Europe I have no clue why. I assume it's because we don't have so many big tech. We have smaller companies. So for me, when we talked last time, for me a 3,000 company is like an enterprise company. And for you, it'll be like, are we talking like a bigger startup, right? So that's why I have some questions about that, because it's very interesting for me. And I think also for the audience, like, could you explain a bit the scale? Because you worked in different, and you say Fortnite, that's not a small company. How do you see this, like, different companies, and then you have also those different kind of PMs that work, and then they need different kind of experience for each of the different size, right?
Yeah, 100%. So luckily I'm like privileged position where my content tends to reach a lot of the PMs in the US. And so if I look at my LinkedIn analytics on impressions, you can go to audience and then you can go to company size. I often am looking at this, and it's so interesting. Like in the US, 20% of PMs are in companies with 10,000 employees or more. So that's like the biggest segment of readers that I have. 20%, 10,000 people or more. And then the next segment, they have 5,000 to 10,000. That's another 20%. So that's another 1/5. Then you have the segment 1,000 to 5,000. That's another 20%. And then you have 1,000 to 100, another 20%. And then you have below 100. So if you want to think about it in terms of fifths, that's kind of how the population size of companies that PMs work at in the United States looks like. And I think to your point, in Europe, what we see is actually a little bit more of a bimodal distribution. So it kind of looks like this. And like the sad reality is that like Europe isn't doing a very good job of like creating a lot of growth stage companies like the US. I mean, you do have some really notable examples. We have Bolt, we have Klarna, we have Revolut, right? There are some amazing companies in Europe, and I don't want to underplay Europe, so many amazing companies. But when you compare the number of those to the United States, actually in the US, we see like thousands of unicorns in waiting. And there are so many that I could name off that nobody would have ever heard of, but are actually worth as much as these Klarnas and Bolts and Revoluts. And so that is the one segment I think that the US is overrepresented. In Europe, I think there are nowadays more and more product managers, also product owners and agile coaches and scrum masters coming out of these big companies. So if you think about Europe, we have some of the world's oldest companies, banks, luxury retailers, watch retailers, all these people, they have e-commerce divisions and they are going through the process of digital transformation. And so that's, I think, the other area that I see, at least in my data, where PMs in Europe come in. And to your final area of your question, which is like, what is the nature of scale, right? So I had some time, but I was privileged to work at Google for a while as a product manager. And if I think about that, what I learned is that when you get into the 100,000 plus employees versus the 10,000 employees versus the 1,000 versus the 100 versus the 10 versus the 1, I've noticed that it's so different how product is done. When you think about just me, the one person business when I started 2 years ago, like product decision, no need for a PRD, no need for any stakeholder alignment. 10 people, you start to need to have some. 100 people, maybe you even need like a Jira board or something like that where everybody can see what everybody else is doing and how things are being prioritized. 1,000 people, maybe you even need a product owner or a product coach who's solely responsible for some of these specific areas. As soon as you get to 5,000 people, 10,000 people, maybe you need a whole product operations function. And then once you get to 100,000 people, you'll see these really evolved motions, like you said, where everything becomes much more defined because you'll have 100 product directors, 100 product VPs. How do these people actually justify their job? A lot of the time, They're improving the product craft. They're more clearly defining types of product management. They're more clearly defining what product managers own. And so I think that's part of the reason, just the number of big tech, but more importantly, those growth stage companies, those unicorns in the US, that sometimes things get more defined.
Makes sense. And that's why when I read especially when I was reading, okay, finding a job as a PM, right? And there were so many, like, okay, if you look for a job in this kind of company, you need at least 15 years of experience. And I'm like, who has 15 years of experience? We didn't have PM jobs 15 years ago. And it is just so striking to me that I know a lot of PMs, and I imagine that even though I'm an agile coach, part of the job more, we still have some kind of levels depending on the company, and that's something new for me. Like, we have levels. You're level 1, level 2, level 3, this is the associate, this is this one, this is the principal. And then you see that you can compare yourself to other roles and see where you stand, right? And it helps. But it's the first time I see that in my current company, OutSystems. In the previous ones, it was just like, well, junior, normal, and senior. That's it. This is what we have. You had to, and then progressively, it was precisely, you mentioned that those big companies, they also have to have some incentive for people to stay, right? You have to create those levels so they know they are what needs to happen, so they reach another level and they feel motivated to keep working. So using that as a segue to this finding a job, I found it like really interesting what you were saying about, and I think it was an interview from like 2 years ago about like finding a job as a PM, what you need and all. Like, there were a lot of questions at the beginning, and then it moved to be like, there's a use case, tell me, right? And how would you see that now? What would be your top advice for the job seekers, especially for people? And I would like to hear one thing. If I'm a person, like I'm a PM or even an agile coach, and I don't know what should be my next step, I can choose, like, there are all those big tech super companies that they set you up for life because you can always say you're an ex-Google, right? But then it's really hard to get there, and we don't know. And then there are the other companies, but there are bigger ones, smaller ones. Where can I really have some impact so I can showcase it later, right? So I would like, if you could a bit help us put a PM, this imaginary PM, on the way, what they should do.
Yeah, so if you want to think about what type of company, the way I would think about the trade-off is that the fact of the matter is, and people don't want to listen to this or hear this, is that the bigger the company you work at, the more you will be paid at the equivalent title. Also, another fact of the matter is that at the bigger the company you work at, the more experience is required to achieve a given title. So, if you're comparing a product manager at Google, for instance, in Europe, there are product managers in Google in Europe that are making 160,000 euros total compensation. There are VPs of product in Europe who are making less than 160,000 euros total compensation, but they work at smaller companies. And so if you go find the VP of product in Europe at Google, they're making a lot, like 400,000 or 500,000 euros. So they're still making really, really, really good money, but they're far and few between. And so as you think about roles, career growth, exploration, one of the things you should think about is, if I want to move into big tech, I may need to accept a lower role. I might be a director of product at an amazing startup. Let's say you work at Monzo. You think you're a director of product. You're amazing. Still at Google, you might get leveled as a senior product manager. And that might be okay, because you should think about, like, my total compensation is still more. And so that's one really important thing to think about is, like, at these companies, somebody who holds a given title, they have a lot of experience. And that's where it comes in. Like we were talking about 15 years of experience. That's a very common benchmark at Google for the group product manager. But a lot of times you'll see people who were at a startup and they grew with the startup. They were really one of the best performers at the startup. Maybe they become group product manager with 6 years experience. And then they're applying to group product manager at Google and they're frustrated. Why am I not getting it? It's because like at Google, you're not really a group product manager yet, even though you have that experience. And it's interesting, one of the jobs we have, whether we're agile coaches or product managers, is influence. And one of the things that, people don't want to talk about, but is true, is like if a 25-year-old wants to influence a 40-year-old, they have a harder job than a 45-year-old. It's just true, right? A 45-year-old, you have the grays. You can tell the 40-year-old, I remember this, right? Like it's easier for you to influence. And this job requires a lot of influence. And so age matters, years of experience matters. I know it's not even legal to like look at these factors, our governments have
being
basically
a woman
said,
matters,
they're like, don't be ageist. That's what the governments will tell you. And so companies will actually use other vectors. They'll look at things like, well, what's the org size that you managed? They'll look at, how many years of product management experience have you had? How many product managers have you fired? How many product managers have you hired? So they'll try to use these more objective things. But that I think is the first lesson, is bigger companies, more pay for the most part. Now, your second part of your question is like, how do you learn? What do you like? And how do you make impact? And I think those are really important vectors too, because let's be honest, pay and title, it's just paper, it's material wealth. And we all know like that doesn't actually lead to real happiness. Real happiness comes from an environment that you like making impact. And I find a lot of people in their 20s, especially, they're much better suited going to a smaller company. Their rate of learning is higher because they're able to reach these higher levels faster. You could become a head of product when you're 28 at a startup if you want. And as a head of product, you're learning so much. You're learning about how to set up a product strategy, how to set up a product vision, how to influence marketing and sales executives, how to set up a go-to-market that works. Versus at 28, if you're at Google, maybe finally you're a PM3. You're at the third level product manager. You're still stuck on a specific feature. You're still helping optimize Google Maps for low data mobile environments, right? And that's like your world that you're living in. So you're going to learn something totally different. And that's the thing, is like, if you're just a junkie for having a big impact, oftentimes you'll get more of that big impact at a smaller place. And so often I'll try to describe to people like phases of your career, and think about phases of your life. Before you have kids, you often want to work hard. You want to be with other young people. A startup is a great place to do that. After you have kids, you often want to get a lot of money, but not work too hard. You want to be able to actually take, at a startup, it's hard to take paternity leave. Maternity leave, they're still a little more respectful, but especially in the US, paternity leave, people sometimes don't even take it. They just show up to work right after their wife has had a baby, right? And so then you're making these trade-off decisions about what phase of life. And so that would be my high-level advice for people choosing.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I agreed about that, especially those phases of your career and phases of your life, they should match. At some point, I think it's also that when you're younger, you're like more hungry, right? I want to try this and that, and I still have all that energy to even stay longer, and I don't mind working many hours, right? Especially we in Europe, we are not so used to working so many hours. We have to go out for a 1-hour lunch break at least, and you are not allowed to put a meeting on that time. Yeah, so I think we have more work-life balance, but still, when you're younger, you're like, yeah, everything for me. And later you are like, okay, well, I already did some things. Now I would like to just be calmer, know what I need to do. But then I have an interesting question that interests me a lot about the PM role, and I think the most difficult part of it, when you were talking about the influence, that's not only the influence, but it's also saying no and being able to kind of so on the one hand, you have to say no in a way, but you have to say no. But to do that, you need to be able to influence others so they don't take it in the wrong way. And what I see a lot is like we just receive those petitions and we have to do them. And then, you see these teams that the PM will go and say, hey, but now we are doing this, but because the field team is saying, and we need to do it. And it's like, why? Did you even ask? Like, can't they wait 1 month? Would something happen if we didn't shift again? We just shifted our priorities. We never seem to arrive to finish anything because it's always being like, hey, now we are doing this. Oh, no, forget about that. We're already doing something else. And I feel that it's just a matter of creating this relationship with the stakeholders and being able to do that. What's your advice on this one?
So it's also about creating the right process for decision making that happens in a collaborative way. I think a lot of longtime PMs will be able to resonate. When they were a junior PM, they thought like they could just do this amazing thinking and then they could just share it with everybody and everybody would be on board. But as we become senior PMs, I think the natural progression is to realize like really the art of product management is serving the best product to users, but bringing the whole company along for the decision. And so if you want to reduce thrash, if you want to stop shifting from direction to direction, you need to figure out who are those people who are shifting you from direction to direction. And how do I bring those people into my planning process so that anytime we do commit to some planned item, if I have to say no to them, I can bring them back to the same discussions we've had. As we together decided, when we looked at A versus B, we decided to sequence A first. And so if we switch to B now, we're going to have all this work on A that is going to be lost, where we only took it to 60%. And that discussion is much easier if they were involved in the decision between A and B, and their item of B was brought up early. It's worse is when they just discover B and they just come to you. And so that's why you need to bring them along for a really good planning process. You need to architect for them. What are the things you see coming up in the next quarter, month, year, whatever sort of planning schedule you want to start with? I feel like most companies these days, the quarter is really working well. So in the quarter, what are the things that you want to focus on? And you want to work with them to really identify these are the options. Option 1, strategy 1, we're going to do X, but we're not going to do Y. Strategy 2, we're going to do Y, but we're not going to do X. Strategy 3, we're going to do A, and we're not going to do X or Y. Now you tell me which one you want to choose. And by creating this optionality for your important stakeholders, whether it's the CEO, whether it's the head of product, whether it's the sales director, so that they understand you are consciously deciding not to do something, really helps, in my opinion. And so a lot of saying no is about trying not to say no in that moment, but having had the say no conversation earlier and then just reminding of what you had done in the past.
Okay, I think that consciously deciding resonates a lot because it's showing that I took it into account, right? It's not I forgot about your thing, which is like, oh my God, how could you? It's like, I have this and I'm choosing consciously to do B. But how can you engage those people that are like far away in the company? You never see them. Those salespeople, field teams that they are so far away. We are in R&D, we are having fun, we have those ping pong tables and our fruit, and they are somewhere there in the field, never to be seen. And then suddenly they come with some, right? It's them usually that come with some feedback from the client that was shouting so much that they will leave if we don't do this, or, well, that's like an urgent story, but usually they come from there and suddenly they have great idea. And it's very hard for me to see how can they be involved with this poor PM planning.
Yeah. There's part of it is like it's not up to the ICPM and the IC field salesperson. A lot of this ultimately is going to have to get solved by the head of product creating the right cadence and schedule with the head of field sales. And the head of product needs to be working regularly with the head of field sales. And they need to be saying, hey, we have 3 types of requests, okay? So you have like requests for big deals that we should be able to plan in advance, because big deals, they do happen in advance. So we need to make sure to get ahead of all of the quarter's requests for our big pipeline. So that's one, right? The second type of request that we have is smaller requests that are pretty small but could help us win a deal that we learn within the quarter that we aren't able to forecast. These types of requests, some percentage of them, we will help you address, and we're going to save some room in our roadmap for those, right? You have to give some to them. And then the third type of request is these requests that get discovered in the quarter, but they're either large or they're not for large customers. If they're a large request, it's going to take us a lot of time. We're not going to be able to prioritize it within the quarter. Or if they're for a small customer, we're not going to be able to prioritize it. And so by giving them this good framework, and then the head of product and the head of field sales really stepping in to say, like, field salesperson, you don't immediately reach out to poor PM. You reach out to your field sales leader, who reaches out to the head of product, and those two decide which of the 3 buckets is this. And they can help then go to the individual PM and say, like, okay, we prioritize it. Now, if you are the poor individual PM and you don't live in a world where the head of product and field sales have created this nice environment, then what you need to do is you need to individually ask that head of field sales and your head of product, okay, which of the 3 buckets does this fall in? Then you need to create a joint conversation, probably also with the head of field sales. So a joint 4-way conversation with the 4 of you, where you guys look at the pros and cons of if we do this, if we don't do this. Set it up in an email, set it up in a meeting if you have a heavy meeting culture. And then you guys jointly decide, this is what we're going to do with this request.
Okay, makes sense. So is this the way that you handle those road mapping exercises and like planning and to have some idea? Because usually companies need to have, now is the time where we should be closing our roadmap for the whole year. How do you see, is that the exercise you do? And then it's a continuous planning kind of way? And how long is your horizon?
Yeah, so at least what I recommend to people is to not try to plan out the roadmap for a year, but instead try to plan out the strategy for the year. What are the big customer segments within the market we're going after? What is our positioning for those customer segments? Based on those customer segments and positioning, what are the big problems we want to solve and metrics we want to move? I think defining that for the year, highly effective. When it comes to roadmaps, I prefer to only think about the quarter. So for the next 3 months, the first question is like, what is the organization of our product teams? What product teams are we even going to have? And then for all of those product teams, what are the individual sub-problems and metrics that they are going to own? And then empower those teams, the individual ICs, designers, tech lead, and engineering manager, and agile coaches to come up with, these are the features on the roadmap we want to build for this next quarter. And then having the leadership review those features. And company to company, it'll vary at what fidelity. But theoretically, what you would like is that the big features, they all basically already have a Figma that has been validated in terms of the problem we believe we're solving is the right problem. And you want to have this inventory of items from the product team itself that they're presenting. These are our 3 big features. We have Figmas for those, and we validated the problem. These are our 3 to 4 smaller features. We don't necessarily have a Figma yet, but we do have a 1-pager, which identifies what we think the problem is, how much we think the metrics could be, and what we think a solution could look like. And then you can use that as product leaders and the team to negotiate and figure out we're working on the right stuff. So along the way, to create all of these artifacts, the team and the product leaders should source information not just from field sales. Like you mentioned, another really, really important group to think about is who are my big customers who might churn. You also need to build features for them. So you want to go to all your customer success and account management reps on all your big customers and ask them, what does the account health look like? What are the features they're asking for? What are the features they're frustrated by? What are the features they love? And so you're taking in that information. Then you also have to consider marketing, right? Marketing's going to have objectives to capture new customers. What are the features that could potentially we market that will help us acquire new customers, right? So you have to go get to that feedback. We already talked about field sales. You also probably need to think about your executives. Your executives always have ideas, right? So you collect all that information from them. And then I think before you finalize the plan, you go back to all these groups and you say, here's our tentative. We had these 3 options. We chose this option. That means we're doing X, but not Y. Does that sound good to you? So that's how I recommend doing planning, is like involving them both in the idea gathering and then the finalized decision.
Do you do that in a group meeting, or do you go one by one to all of those, especially in the part where you present the plan that they might not want to see?
Yeah, I think that you have to do it collaboratively, but it doesn't need to be in meetings, So a lot of times we'll do this via email itself. Like, first things first, field sales teams, tell us your ideas. So, okay, we collected your ideas. Second thing, we've investigated the ideas. This is all the ideas. Here you go, field sales. Here's an update. And then third thing, we've basically rated all the ideas. Field sales / all these other teams individually, you've emailing them. Here's like the ratings. And then finally, here are the options. 1, 2, 3. And here's where we're leaning to choose. Do you have any feedback? So those are like 4 or 5 touch points where you're individually reaching out to these important groups. And the reason individual is better is because you don't want to have this big meeting where somebody's speaking up about one feature and then another person speaking up about another feature. Instead, you want to get everybody pre-aligned via these smaller, if it's a meeting culture, do meetings, but I prefer asynchronous communication. You get people pre-aligned. And then instead, when you do have the big meeting, it's a very positive meeting. It's almost like a kickoff of the quarter, right? It's like we have agreed on these are the big features we're going to work on. Let's kick off the quarter together.
That sounds so great, but I can't help but wonder, do we need really like mature people, teams? And I don't mean, oh, you're immature, but as a culture, you need to be mature enough to be able to take a no for an answer. That's only an email. And understand that for the better part of the company, that's the way to go, right? As opposed to, this is mine, I said it, the customer that I have will churn. And then it becomes, I think it is a lot about the maturity of the company that you can do this, because you understand there is this PM person, a product head or VP of product, whose job is to define what will be done from gathering all the feedback, right?
There's also just a certain amount of stuff you're only going to learn along the way. And so even if you are the most mature, you might learn that, hey, our biggest account, they really disliked this new feature. And, that's something you're only going to learn in the quarter. And so you might need to then devote resources so that they actually like the feature, because you don't want your biggest account to churn. And so part of it is about creating the right lanes for features to understand like when they're important enough to actually cause a shift versus when they're not, to start to create the right understanding amongst your stakeholders about how decisions are made like that, and trying to make them in the open and ask through their feedback. Even if you have a very immature company, immature sales organization, for instance, over time, I think probably in like 6 months, you can train them into this new way of thinking. It's a matter of kind of you dedicating time to listening to some of their requests, helping them understand why you said no. And if they do react badly to that email, being willing to jump on a meeting. Even further, as a head of product, being willing to fly over to where the head of sales is and meet them for dinner in person. I've certainly done that as a head of product too. So you need to use your influence. That's the name of the game. You have to do it right. It's better to, if you start to see a stakeholder who doesn't like a decision, to almost just go overboard for 3 months with them than to just have that festering like type of complaint about the product org.
True, true. I'm thinking now how many times we are just afraid to face the reality, right? Somebody is not happy, we know about it. And instead of just, hey, let's meet, let's talk about it, let's figure it out. It's all for the good of company. It's not our personal lives on this, right? And let's just have this conversation. I think it's a great advice, and it's all about this being confident enough to have that influence and to like really show it, and also be able to like, hey, I'm giving you a hand. Let's talk. Let's see. Let's discuss. And sometimes it's just not happening. I don't know why.
People are too busy in general.
Yeah.
Is people feel they're too busy for this type of stuff. You know, if you have a PRD that your team wanted you to write last week and you still haven't written it, and now random field sales team in Estonia has a request and they're upset with you, and it's so much easier to just ignore them and like let that work fall under the table while you focus on the PRD that's overdue. And so part of the problem is that like we've overloaded most people's jobs where they don't actually have time. And then the other part of it is people in these jobs aren't doing a good enough job prioritizing and realizing, well, obviously I'm too busy. I need to figure out how to take my low value stuff and give that to somebody else, because influencing stakeholders is often high value stuff. So I need to make time for that.
True. Makes sense. Yeah. Because I think we too often just jump to a conclusion like, okay, this person just giving me problems, this person, and we are getting to this prejudice, right? And it's just because we actually don't have much time to deal with it and to like see the bigger picture. And I was thinking about it myself. Like I sometimes have this, oh, this person is a nice person and this person is not such nice. But this nice person can do something I don't like as well, but I will be more patient with them because in my head they are already a nice person, right? So I think a lot of that is also managing our own view of people and just seeing them as people, and everybody is okay. We just have to get there.
Or even less, like another way to think about it is think about them less as like people and more as they're a function of the business. A lot of the conflicts that you see are almost by design. The business has given that person a narrow OKR around the churn rate of their clients. And so if their client churns, their bonus is less. And so the business has basically incentivized them around something different, where your OKR is around this other metric that has nothing to do with their churn. And so the item is not getting prioritized. And so it has nothing to do with how nice or how not nice they are, really. It just has to do with how the business was designed for conflicting incentives. And that's what I often find, is that it's just a conflicting incentive, maybe their boss disagrees with your boss, and that's the real root cause. And so sometimes almost just trying to think a step back of, why is this person and I constantly getting into conflict? It probably doesn't have to do with they're not nice, but has to do with the incentives that they have.
Nice. That's very good advice. Yeah. I think it's really helping to see like function, and in the job we have incentives. It's not our fault. Yeah, very nice way. I really like this perspective. I think this could be really helpful for people to step back and just like, okay, that's it. And that's happening all the time, right? We are thinking sometimes, are we sure we work for the same company? We seem to have so many disagreements about the way forward. Interesting. Love it.
I think it's a feature, not a bug, to have disagreements as a PM. Like if I look at a lot of the best features I had shipped, potentially the product team was really excited about it, then somebody's really upset. So we have to shape the feature for what they were upset about, but they were upset for like a valid reason, and we eventually shipped a better feature. So I think like the art and science of product is made better by these disagreements that you're having with other functions.
Nice. So basically what you need to learn as a PM is to learn how to navigate conflict.
Yeah,
because you will
not
be
shy
in a
from
constant conflict.
Constant.
What a nice life.
Yeah, it's funny to me that people glamorize the job.
Right? It's just basically being in a constant war with other people. That's what PM does.
Yeah, and don't forget the executives who think that you're not doing enough work, the right work, and not driving enough impact.
Yeah. Oh my God, interesting. I would like to shift a bit now because I have this one question that is very interesting for me. Because you cannot talk about anything in the future if you don't talk about AI. And I saw some of your pieces talking about this AI PM. But before we go into this AI PM, I would like to go very briefly, if you could explain, because you mentioned like 4 different kinds of PM. And talk briefly about the growth core platform, and then I would like for you to give, because I saw that mostly those PMs, those first 3, have pretty similar jobs and pretty similar teams, but then you go to this AI PM and it's like a different world.
Yeah, so the way to think about this, and before I explain growth core platform AI, let's first explain AI PM. So there are 3 types of AI PMs. There are AI PMs who work on AI products, like the PMs at OpenAI, like the PMs at Google DeepMind, or the PMs at Anthropic. So that's one group of AI PMs. The second group of AI PMs is PMs who build AI features into normal products. So a really common AI that probably most of us have seen is AI comments on LinkedIn. That is an AI feature to enable commenting engagement on LinkedIn. Okay. And then the third group of AI PMs is your AI powered PM. That's your PM who might not even be working on an AI feature, but they're using AI tools to succeed in their job. So when we talk about AI PMs versus growth, core, and platform, I'm actually talking about that very first bucket, which is people who are building AI products. They're focused on AI as the core. So that group of product managers has become a new group. So before there were 3 types of PMs. There were growth, core, and platform. And in fact, I feel that the types of job they do is very different. Okay. Your core, you're fundamentally solving problems for users. Your growth, you're fundamentally trying to move metrics. Your platform, you're fundamentally trying to create a platform for your internal company and developers. And so these are very different jobs, essentially like your North Star, how you organize your work, how you think about work. It's totally different. Your core PMs, it's very easy for them to tie to user value, and they often tie to metrics more and more. Your growth PMs, it's very easy for them to tie to metrics. And your platform PMs, they're often left out. They're like, huh? What? Because, they're creating value for internal teams. It's like one step removed often. And so those are the 3 categories of PMs. I think in my piece, one of the things I wanted to do was look at how many open roles are there today amongst these 4 categories? Because you hear so much about AI PM, growth PM, and platform PM. And here's the bad news, guys. There aren't that many of those roles. What I found is that 88% of roles are still core product management. So growth, platform, and AI are like small, less than 5% groups, each of them. But what the AI PM life is versus these other ones, what makes it unique is that you're often working with AI researchers. So what's our normal sort of group? As a PM, we have development, engineering, which is another word for development, design, and product. It's like the product trio that Teresa Torres talks about. In AI, you also have these AI researchers. So they're specifically like data scientists, usually PhDs in AI, who are just focused on statistical concepts within the neural network, within the AI model. Then you still have developers on top of that who are creating the UX of the features, the backend DevOps, all of the normal development tasks. So it's like a 4th group. So instead of a product trio, you then have the product foursome. And within AI, what you'll also notice is that the life cycle of products is very different. When was GPT-4 released? Like a year ago? GPT-3, like a year and a half before that? So you're not releasing on as fast of a cadence. It's like a different sort of product and world. And most importantly, not only is the work different and who you work with different, but how much you get paid is very different. AI PMs are getting paid a lot more than the other types of PM. And so those are the major differences for AI PM.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great breakdown. And I think probably in Europe again, we have just the core PM. I don't know. But I see increasingly that we are getting the platform is becoming, right? Platform engineering is a thing, and we are now putting more emphasis on that. Before I go to the PM, to the AI questions, I just wanted to ask one thing. Do you see that the platform PM is treated in a different way because they are not really managing the features for clients? And I really have to ask this. So if we go back to those creating the roadmap, creating what we will do next, do you also used to mark them differently, like enablers or whatever's, those items that were worked by the platform teams as opposed to those that are going to the customers? Is there a difference in the handling of those on the roadmap for the company?
Yeah, 100%. That's why I think it's a good thing that Europe is adopting more the platform PM broken out from core PM, because what ends up happening if you put platform PM in with core PMs is, number one, you invest less in platform features. And that's almost like prioritizing the short term over the long term. What you tend to do is you tend to accrete a lot of technical debt. All of the sudden, for your developers to ship a feature, it takes 2 weeks. Whereas when you started, it could have taken 2 hours, right? And so instead of having a bike with circular wheels, you're giving your developers a bike with square wheels. And it rarely makes sense to underinvest in platform. The second thing is that your platform PMs don't get promoted, because they're compared to these core PMs. These core PMs, you can very easily say, okay, Maria shipped X feature. It drove 80% adoption amongst users. We think that it drove $10 million in it. She's better than Aakash, who only drove 10% adoption and 5 million ARR. So Maria's getting promoted. But then you look at platform, there's no adoption, there's no revenue associated. All of a sudden you say, okay, he's a 0. He gets put into performance improvement plan, And so you don't properly evaluate or reward or grow your platform PMs. And then finally is like your leadership doesn't develop specialization. So a lot of times what you'll see in like mature product companies in the US is they'll have a platform product director, because that person then can live and breathe platform investments. They can make the decisions to invest the right amount. They can evaluate their PMs the right way. They can coach their PMs the right way. A lot of PM advice we see, it's like, talk to your customers every single day. Put prototypes in front of them every single day. A platform PM can't even do that. So you can coach them in the more specific way as well.
Okay, interesting. And when it comes to those issues on the board, like when you prioritize a roadmap, it just goes to a different bucket, right? Because it is a different capacity. Those teams are somehow defined.
Separated, exactly. You keep it in a different bucket so that you can prioritize it properly.
Okay. And now but that's great. I also agree that requires also a different skill set probably of a PM, because you have to be technical and really understand the code. Otherwise, you have no clue what they're talking about. How are you going to prioritize? You don't know what it says. So yeah. And then finishing about this AI PM, I can't help but for me, it's so strange. It's like one day we woke up and OpenAI was there and we could go and use ChatGPT, right? It was like 2-3 years ago. I don't even know. Time passes so quickly. I think it will be 3 years already, right? And then, how can you have people specialized in that? Because, of course, in my mind, mostly I associate these LLMs with OpenAI. There are different ones as well, and we have the Copilot for the developers. We have so many different ones. Like everybody now is using a bit of AI. How how does one get that knowledge? I know that there are some boot camps and some trainings. I think you were talking to some ladies, which I really liked, that are doing those kind of trainings for PMs to become AI PM, because that's how you find that information, right? It's really hard if you are in a company that doesn't embrace it. Where will you find it? You have to go like on your own and learn. Tell me.
Yes. I think like realistically, the number one way if you want to go from product management or product coach or product operations into AI product management is you want to start to become passionate about AI yourself. And so a lot of the AI conversation happens on X. So joining up X, starting to talk within the AI community, starting to see what they're talking about, and then following a lot of their trends that they're finding. So a recent trend that's really big on X within the AI community is like building your own apps with AI. And so then going out there and trying it yourself, saying, okay, why don't I build a help bot for my company? So I want to train an OpenAI API on my company's help database, and I want to create a chatbot. Okay, very nice, small little project. Now use AI to code up that app and try it with the 4 major tools today. So there's 4 tools competing. There's V0, there's Cursor, there's Replit Agent, and then, like you said, there's GitHub Copilot. So you could try these 4 tools and then you could learn about them. So as you learn these tools and you're building AI products using AI and you're reading AI content, you'll really quickly get involved with the whole AI ecosystem. And what I've found is that everybody who breaks into AI product management, they're very involved in the AI ecosystem. They can fully name, what was the big launch that recently just happened within AI, right? OpenAI launched Sora yesterday. So they would be able to say that. And then what was the big launch from Google? Okay, they just launched their new quantum chip. They would know that information. And so being on top of the news and then being a builder. The thing about being an AI PM is you need to be pretty technical. You need to not be afraid of code. You need to be able to talk about coding concepts and neural network concepts. And so actually diving into things I think is useful. And then finally, you need some proof of work. So a boot camp could help you create a side project, or you could create a side project yourself. Or I've seen a lot of people recently, they contribute to open source AI. Or another opportunity that people do sometimes is they'll do AI research. Or they'll work for a local nonprofit who wants to incorporate AI. Or they'll work for a local small startup as a side project who wants to create AI. So there's so many opportunities. But if you want to become an AI PM, get your hands dirty.
All right, that's great advice. You see, you opened the world for me. I was like, who knows where to start? I just use the ChatGPT. Am I an AI PM already?
Not quite. You're an AI powered PM, which is great.
Okay, that's the other one you mentioned. Yeah, I think that's the inevitable future for us, that we just have to embrace AI and just share how we use it, as opposed to like fake it that, no, I never use it. I'm just smarter suddenly, right? From one day to another.
I just suddenly can do 10 times the work. Yeah, it's kind of like, I think of it as like the calculator or Excel or Google Docs or Notion. We've seen all these evolutions of tools. This is just a new tool that we have to use.
Great, and that sounds like a good note to end our super conversation. It went so quickly, so thank you so much. I really learned a lot of things. I hope the audience will be just as interested and curious as I was talking to you. Really great topics, and I really like this, this seeing things in this different perspective, for me especially as this agile coach. So we have the PM perspective, but also from the United States as opposed to Europe, which gives like, really, this can be done this way, it's so easy. And I really like those hacks and those ways to get to, when you explained a lot about like, how can you really create systems and processes for you as a PM so that everybody knows what to expect, everybody knows what can expect from you and what is expected of them, and you kind of create this nice ecosystem that everybody that the conflict, the permanent conflict that you live in is bearable to survive, to live, right? So really interesting. Thank you so much. And maybe you have something you would like to mention or point the audience to your wherever they can find you. So this is the moment.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Check out Maria on my podcast. She did an amazing job. We went into a whole bunch of really cool topics. So see you guys online.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.